Aphoristic appendage to On Truthtelling. 1501 to 1550. 1501. The Achilles heel of eminence, achievement, and reputation is forgetting one's humble origins, for, ultimately, everyone has these, and being co-opted by power. 1502. That in times of war political leaders of powerful nations are willing to make threats of the most perilous sort and be confident they will be generally applauded shows how unlikely it is that humanity will be able to sustain the belief about progress without at least some major historical reality check. 1503. The ongoing conflicts and wars in the world make the idea of saving it from climate change or deadly viruses the biggest, most foolish, and possibly most diabolic joke there is. 1504. An aphorism should only take in as much detail, precision, information, and so on as to persuade the aphorist. His concern for truthfulness overrides his concern for having to persuade others about it. 1505. Due to a lack of time, energy, and interest, we are far less likely to find out the other side of the story than listen to the one we prefer many times over. 1507. With great powers at war, the most constant rule is to break rules. 1508. The habitual lying of politicians and, for that matter, a good many others wouldn't be possible without the huge appetite for false stories and related items of interest. 1509. However prestigious the institution, it's a mistake to assume it's incapable of making mistakes and sometimes even far worse. 1510. Working in the criminal system means having to deal with what a lot of poor souls have done in their worst moments. 1512. How many are those who, leading decent lives, are awake to everything in them but asleep to everything else? 1513. Let it not be said that one can live without comrades and can, even if it's only ghosts from the past that, at some point, take on these roles. 1514. If one wants to know the truth of a matter, it is always better to look to those with the highest integrity than to well-oiled corporations, vested interests, or people simply used to getting their palms greased. 1515. A complex situation still evolving is precisely where the charlatan or fool, but perhaps one should also include the paid commentator, gives the impression he has it all worked out. 1516. We are all actors on the world stage with roles that are more or less determined and with scripts that only vary with the scenes we're in, and, of course, it goes without saying some are much better than others. It's a sort of iron law that constitutes our social lives and, without which, we would recognize neither ourselves nor others. 1517. We all know we are animals, but who, since the dawn of civilization, has taken this to heart except those who were stark raving mad and then some. 1518. With problems too deep of their own making, governments don't turn around, they double down, until the axe falls. 1519. After the need to take the next breath and a few other vital functions, the one of feeling right about oneself takes precedence. 1520. Every great philosopher creates a monument of thought that, if one takes into consideration all the critics and commentators who come to it later, has the aspect of both an impregnable castle and a house of cards. 1521. If it's true, almost any idea, custom, principle, or tradition, no matter how well established or long-lasting, can be challenged and perhaps done away with in the name of truth. It's also true it can be subverted in the name of good, however superficial or self-serving this may be. 1522. Love and hate are opposites but less unlike each other than indifference. 1523. The thought that can never go public, or at least in the biggest way, is that evil is necessary for good, but the good, in order to be what it is, must forever deny this even to the point of doing its own mischief. 1524. As human beings, it seems natural to think of ourselves as being important in the universe. After all, however dispensable we may be in the long run, all signs and indications point to our being, despite our dropping off like flies, its biggest-brained ones. 1525. There is a lot of wisdom to be found in great literary works, whereas in lesser works, too tied up with popularity, profit, or politics, it's slighted. 1526. To be fair, it should be said that care and concern go straight to the top of modern-day society as much as cruelty and corruption. 1527. Ultimately, respectability depends on not how well one is able to avoid acting crudely, brutishly, or outrageously, but how well one prevents others from knowing about it or, at the very least, condemning it. 1528. When the right pushes itself to the extreme, it becomes cruel. When the left does so, it becomes clownish. But just as the cruel can have its clownish moments, so the clownish its cruel. 1529. Just as it may be said there's a fine line between genius and insanity, so it may also be said about comedy and cruelty. 1530. Wisdom is not only putting to use what one knows well in the best possible way but also distinguishing it clearly from what one doesn't. 1531. Alexander Solzhenitsyn spent 8 years in Soviet work camps storing up hardship like honey for later literary use, wisdom, and benefit. 1532. Hearing about the life and death issues of the past will put to sleep a significant number of people who, if actually faced with them, would, with all the intensity to be expected from lived experience, go into panic mode. 1533. It's a sad fact of life that things sometimes have to get much worse before getting better. 1534. If certain crises function as the great correctors of collective and systematic stupidity, then the worst, like flood to fertile soil, is tied to the best. 1535. Party politics as portrayed by both mainstream and social media is an ongoing blame game that cannot be taken seriously as representing the human condition without leading to the conclusion that its essential nature is moral degeneracy. 1536. Astronomically, cosmologically, or eschatologically speaking, all human life is living on a razor. 1537. When discussing a matter, two friends should be able to disagree without being disagreeable. However, if an unpleasant moment occurs, they should be able to overcome it without too much difficulty. Now let us imagine these two friends to be truth seekers of the highest order. Could it be that any disagreement between them, no matter how upsetting, doesn't finally serve as but one more path towards their common objective? 1538. Morality becomes immorality for the simple reason that, in its fight to assert itself, it's willing to pick up any weapon at hand. 1539. The great optical illusion is seeing the present as a defining moment more important than all others for the fate of humanity. 1540. Lying is lord of the short term, truth the long. 1541. In the area of politics, morality, and religion, being lied to doesn't bother an enormous number of people until it brings bad consequences if not outright disaster. 1542. It's possible to integrate almost seamlessly popular nonsense with the tried and true for at least a short period of time. 1543. With respect to the truth, everything new, be it product or event, is a bit of a bad deal insofar as, with its potential to be put on the market and sold, it doesn't come without at least some false advertising. 1544. What gives religion its incredible power, whether it be Christianity, communism, or climate change, is some long-term plan or project, utopian in nature and widespread or universal in scope, which allows people to be divided into those who are good for being for it and those who are bad for not. 1545. What danger is there in thinking too deeply about life if it's essentially endless miracle and endless mystery? 1546. If all thought about war and what it entails for humanity are put aside, it cannot be denied that our essentially social character, including the little recognized friendly and gracious treatment of strangers, is what has kept the race going for thousands if not tens of thousands of years. 1547. Is it possible to buy into some royal falsehood and yet be scrupulously honest in one's day-to-day affairs? Of course, since every large-scale certainty is this falsehood. 1548. Perhaps one important reason most people get married is their inability to have lifelong conversations with themselves which, in point of fact, some people are capable of and even enjoy more than most other conversations. This state of affairs, taken as a corollary to the first, may help to explain their not getting married. 1549. Growing old gracefully, cynically viewed, is simply decaying less quickly than most. 1550. An old face, generally speaking, is whatever has gone by and is largely out of sight, however great it may have been. A young face is the promise of the future, however illusory.